We're going to have an Emergent session today on how to run potentially the OHBM meeting of our dreams in the future. And I originally had crafted that abstract that I put in on the Open Science Framework, not so much because I wanted to present something. I wanted people to start thinking about how we can do things in the future. Yeah, you know, we have a lot of things going on in the world that are going to make OHBM meetings really challenging in the future. I don't think things are going to change. And then, you know, we experienced the challenge this year. Council and Program Committee on OHBM with full steam ahead planning a face-to-face meeting, full program, it's set, we're, you know, trying to do things, and then COVID happened. And then we had to negotiate with the convention centre, make sure we didn't lose the deposit. There was a whole spin-off of things that we had to do. And yet, you know, the way I see it, the situation as I see it as OHBM is a huge oil tanker, and it goes at full throttle. And then we had to suddenly make it turn on a dime at full throttle. And then we wonder why we've all got whiplash. That's how I feel with all this situation. And that was why I wanted to have a session that we could think about, okay, what didn't work? And that's what I want to talk about, people's experiences for the next 15 or so minutes from this year's meeting. What was bad? What was good? You know, the good, bad, and the ugly. Then we'll switch to what expectations do you want for future meetings? Because now you've got an idea of how things might work from what we've seen from things developing over the week. And then finally, what can be done to make this happen? And so we've got a number of folks that you can see on your screen. Katja, Heuer and Roberto Toro have just joined us. And we've also got a lot of people in the audience who are going to hang out and said they want to chat. Let me just mention a few names so that you know who's with us today. Remy Gao is probably with us in the audience. Aishel Bilgan, Anibal Solon. We've got Yaroslav Halchenko, Elizabeth Dupre, Soichi Hayashi, Pradeep Ramanath, and Dan Lurie, probably with his cat. And then on the OHBM side, we've got Pierre, and OSR side, Pierre Bellec, Dan Margvillis, and we've probably got Randy Gollop's probably floating around here, and then Joanne Tai, our executive. So that's who we've got all listening in online. So now, without further ado, I'm going to throw it open for people here on the panel to weigh in about the experiences from this year. Give some thoughts about what's good and bad. We're recording this, and we're also having notes taken on this on the Etherpad. So we'll have it all. So who would like to start here of this distinguished panel that we've got? Go ahead, Pierre. Someone start.
Sure, it's interesting. Like I feel like we're in a classroom and everybody's kind of like, oh, I don't know. So for me, the main good is that it happened. You know, there's been lots of challenges and things that didn't work, but I believe actually being able to have HBM happen has huge benefits. The first of all is the science that, you know, we still get to hear about all this wonderful program that was assembled for months of hard work. And the second one is that it's a huge opportunity to learn. And unfortunately, I have to confess, I'm doing that a lot. Like I'd rather have an early iteration that's totally messy and chaotic than not have an early iteration at all. And I feel like there's lots of things that we can point our fingers at and say, oh, that was bad. But next year is going to get much better because of this. Now, in terms of the bad, I would say that I feel the tools that we've used this year did not provide a huge added value to have the meeting live. It was a lot of, you know, online videos that could have been released on YouTube. And the Open Science SIG has played the role over the years of, it's like the fringe of like our, you know, progressive tech people. And I think what they put together really showed how we could have a huge added value. this Emergent session being one great example of that. So I'm hoping we can grow this aspect of the meeting so that people, know why they're signing to an online conference rather than a YouTube channel. So that's all I got, my two main ones.
I'll go next if you want me to. So thanks to the OSR for allowing me to share my opinions on this topic. I think we are learning a lot about virtual conferences. This is just something that all researchers and all educators are sort of taking a real steep learning curve with the experiences that we're having since March. And we're learning a lot about virtual conferences, and this includes the way in which our inequities are exacerbated. And I'm thinking about that specifically from the viewpoint of connectivity issues, which I felt was clearly illustrated by last week's really great keynote on low field MRI. But virtual conferences also offer some benefits, and I think we should really seek to expand these as much as possible. Historically, serving on OHBM program committees and council has required a lot of significant commitments in terms of time and travel, and that exerts a disproportionate negative impact on leadership opportunities for members who have health and disability issues, heavy childcare, and caretaking responsibilities. So large virtual conferences are showing us that while these burdens don't disappear, and that members with these issues and responsibilities can't attend all sessions, can't be there 24/7, it does in part reduce their impact and allow some level of participation where previously there was none. So I think it's really important that we're having this conversation, and that as we move forward, even once we start in-person conferences again, we retain some footprint in the virtual world. With respect to OSR, I've personally been delighted by its evolution over the past many years and feel that everybody really stepped up. And this year, OSR stood out as a very shining example for how to pivot at the last minute and organize a conference with excellence and diversity and equity built into its very bones. I've been really blown away by this. And this was also accomplished by the stated intention of the organizers during the meeting itself, the words they use, the code of conduct, the mindfulness to these issues, keeping it really at the forefront. And then that bled over into the resultant tone of the discussions. And so I know OHBM is recognizing OSR's ability to pull together the platforms and learn from that, from the resources that will enable effective virtual participation. And I'm glad to hear also that OSR is going to play a larger role in OHBM infrastructure and representation on council. But I don't want to see OHBM just harvesting this knowledge about the platforms and leaving the bones of the inclusivity behind. I want that to be carried forward as well. And I think we should emphasize to council that the OSR did a fabulous job of identifying topics, identifying presenters who would encourage discussion that's inclusive of different backgrounds and perspectives. And that includes topics and presenters that are left out of so many other similar discussions in similar forum. And they also facilitated a really welcoming and accessible environment so that individuals who may not have been invited specifically to present felt empowered to speak up and contribute in a way that we don't always see in lots of other environments. And so that also expanded the footprint of the group and made it more inclusive. So I'm gonna kind of step back and let some other people talk. I have more to say, and I look forward to hearing from others.
Let me just step in there and just say that our diversity and inclusivity symposium as part of OHBM was a corker for the symposium. And for those who don't speak Australian English, it was bloody brilliant. It seeded potentially people writing new review articles and things like that. And that's going to be a permanent part of OHBM programming. I just wanted to put that in there, and just because that's what we've decided. We had decided that even before this meeting.
I think I'll come in right there because so I'm part of the diversity committee. So it's wonderful we've got so much positive feedback. I'm not here in an official capacity, but I think my personal experience also follows on quite nicely from what Angie said, because I think although I'm a privileged person, I live in Germany, I'm white, I do think that the meeting, specifically for me, I felt a lot of benefits from it being virtual. As someone who's kind of on the neurodivergence spectrum, that the in-person meeting is just, it can be so overwhelming. It can be so difficult to deal with, especially the poster sessions last year. It's really, really difficult. And then even the talk, sitting in, you know, a dark room, trying to concentrate and thinking that, oh, there's another session that I might want to look at as well. And then I'll have to leave at the right time. And it can be quite overwhelming. And I think from the perspective of it being accessible, it being virtual really made a big difference for a lot of people. Not only because I can go back and I can watch that talk again, or I can, you know, press pause and, you know, take 5 minutes if I need that time, but just feeling that I can take it at my own pace was really important. Now, I hope maybe someone else with other experiences that come from that kind of marginalized group point of view will be able to comment on that. But another thing that I also think is really important that we also mentioned in the Etherpad is that for other groups, for instance, people with disabilities, this is, you know, the meeting is not accessible. It's difficult for someone who has accessibility needs to take part in the meeting. And although we did have a lot of issues with the virtual, the real-time transcribing of talks that didn't really work the way it should have in a lot of cases, I think there are a lot of aspects where for people with accessibility needs, this was a pretty good solution, but I'd be eager to hear what other people have to say about that as well.
Well, I'd just like to say, yeah, I think it's been really useful also for parents, for people who have caring responsibilities to be able to attend when normally I wouldn't have been able to attend this year because I'm heavily pregnant. And so that's been really great. For me, a really, really important part of getting the virtual conferencing right is the environmental impact, the fact that, you know, we save people flying. We really dramatically reduce our carbon footprint. So I think it's as there've been a lot of virtual conferences, you know, a lot of conferences having to go virtual this year, I think people are getting a sense of that a lot of these things can be done virtually, especially when it comes to organizing, as Angie was saying, that also increases inclusivity. So I think that's a really positive aspect of having got OHBM virtual this year. That there's a lot, and I would really hope that a lot of things can be kept to all these benefits for inclusivity and for environmental impact, all that.
So I'd like to second a lot of what's been said so far. I think I mentioned to some people a few days ago that, you know, over the past few years, there's been like, what is this OSR? What are they doing? You know, is it really worth the investment in funding and resources for it? And I feel like this conference has effectively killed all those questions. That if it wasn't for sort of the community and the logistics and everything that was built up over the last few years, it wasn't just the heroics of a few people coding together the actual sites. It was everyone saying, this is what we need, this is how to put it together, advertising it, fitting it together. And that's the community aspect. So I feel like that is huge. I will say that one of the reasons I'm here is when some of these discussions started, I threw together a shared Google Doc on lessons learned and suggestions. I'm sharing it on the Mattermost now. If anyone wants access to edit it, they can. During the meeting, I think the Etherpad probably makes more sense. But I'll also say that none of us here can see the Crowdcast. So if you're asking questions there, hopefully someone can pass them along. Because this has been a little bit too friendly, I will push in one general direction. As I've been seeing the stuff fill up that lessons learned document, I feel like there's two categories of suggestions. There's things that were unique to, wow, this is the first virtual meeting we've had, and all these things we hadn't thought of are issues. And then there's other things that are been standing issues for a long time that we can kind of paste over, like accessibility, noisy poster halls, making people who can't handle that more challenging, not captioning talks during the meeting, all these things that kind of we just for lack of a word, accepted without giving as much thought as we should, suddenly came to the forefront. So the example I give is maybe HBM is this big ship sailing forward and it now has to turn on a dime, but until it had to turn sharp, no one noticed that the screws holding the rudder on could have been a little bit tighter. So I think one of the exciting things about this discussion is all these things that aren't specific to virtual meetings that are worth more discussion. One of the big areas that I think, as I was reading through what I wrote and other people wrote in that document, is that OSR has evolved into more than just a special interest group. It's a large number of people putting in as much or more time than people on the program committee to help this conference run in some ways. And what that means in where their voices are heard, who gets stipends, who gets paid, is a discussion I don't think we can answer in this meeting, but I think it's worth serious discussion over the next year, because some of the volunteers, particularly in OSR, are not doing work that I would call volunteer work anymore. They're doing fundamental jobs to keep this conference functioning.
I want to second that. And I also want to bring up an individual who is not here specifically because of that, and that's Kirsty Whittaker. And her voice was very, very, very much missed this year. And so really thinking about the role that the OSR plays and the role that volunteer work can have adverse impacts on our careers, particularly if you're coming from a marginalized group, that these are things that OHBM should really be pushing forward to make sure that we don't do that to our members. So a big wave from afar to Kirsty. We miss her this year.
And just a shout out to Daniel, because he got crafted this Google Doc, which people have been editing, and it's evolving very, very nicely. And that's really, really lovely. I've got chicken scratchings in there too, for what it's worth. But people have got some really thoughtful ideas. It's going to be very, very useful. And he can share that with you. Katja and Roberto, do you want to chip in and say something?
Yep, I think that to us, what was interesting with the way in which the meeting happened this year is that somehow it put back the spotlight in what's important for the meeting. So it's not the fancy place, it's not the, I don't know, the company booths, it's not the nice bag, it's not the catering. Like, what people want is to have a space for discussing, for pushing the field forward, for sharing, for teaching each other, for presenting our problems. And probably because of the restrictions of having a physical meeting to organize, we were somehow forgetting what was the origin of the OHBM meetings, which is that. It's about meeting, about having a proper way of discussing and communicating. And probably that kind of that original sense of the OHBM meetings aligns more nicely with what the OSR people are doing. You know, it's this open science stuff is about sharing your resources. Like, why, for example, the symposia or the educational sessions, we have to wait several months sometimes to have them online. Why we don't just have them online immediately, like we are able to have now? Or why don't we have all the posters like available immediately as we have them now, and we have to sometimes wait, or they are printed, or they used to come in a CD. Of course, that was a restriction of that time, but today there's no reason why we shouldn't have all posters available immediately, and etc. So I think it's interesting how it brought us back kind of to the initial spirit of gathering, meeting, and discussing all together.
Yeah, I also completely agree on that. And maybe one thing to add, I loved how the community responded to it, basically creating the space that we want for the interaction, like bringing GatherTown in is like, yes, let's interact, bringing Jitsi in. Yes, I don't want to have a PDF of my poster up and then chat with somebody by writing. I want to talk, and I want to have several people at the same time in front of my poster. So we create the Jitsi solution. And then, okay, now we have Jitsi rooms, but we have no way to query them. So let's add that on top. And the community evolved like super quickly. There was like huge efforts from many people that were dedicating their time without being asked, just because they felt like this is what we want and what we need. And I think that gave a direction for OHBM as a community and as an organization that we can just follow and keep going.
It wasn't only the science that we were missing, and we kind of compensate somehow, but also the playfulness of being all together. No? So the Gather Town brings back this like we were in a nice party yesterday night.
Yes.
It was lovely.
Yeah, I agree. And having been to the first OHBM, there was this, what I've really, despite all of the issues that we've had, there's this wackiness about this meeting that I've really enjoyed. And that was the same with that first meeting. I enjoyed the wackiness of Club Night last night. My memories of this meeting are going to be my interview with Leslie Underlighter as one, and then the second wing was Club Night with Pradeep Ramana with his shirt, fantastic shirt, and his party Zoom background dancing, and then Dan Lurie dancing with his cat. That was when I went to Club Night. That was the first image I saw, Dan, jiving with his cat. And that's the kind of wackiness that I think OHBM's always been. And so that, recreated that for me. So I'm going to push you all over to the next topic. And we've already dealt with this a little bit. The next question I had was, what expectations do people have for future meetings? And you guys have already touched on this. So if there's something else that we haven't touched on, let's do it.
Picking up Roberto's comments about making the posters and the lectures online, in the Google Doc that Dan has been helping us with, a comment was made about leveraging that flipped classroom model. And I really think that many of us agree that that is a really, really useful way for thinking about how to improve the interactive nature of the conversations that we're having. If we batch release the lectures and the posters in advance, give people time to digest them, to really read them when they're able to, especially in a COVID situation when a lot of us are dealing with a lot of distractions at home and we don't always have the exact schedule that we want to have. But having the chance to read through the lectures and the posters and really get a sense of what is being presented, then that enables a more nuanced and interactive discussion at a later Q&A, such that the synchronous meeting component is focusing on discussions and Q&A and not so much the actual presentation of the lecture itself.
Okay, we've got a comment from the audience about conference budgeting, and somebody's asking potentially for some sort of refund who presented posters this time, because they're saying the system didn't support. They feel that the system didn't support their presentation, the poster sessions were essentially migrated to a data lab setup, which was free. That's going to be a tricky issue, and that's something we're going to have to discuss on council. We've had to take a number of really difficult decisions over the last couple of years. We've had to change venues because of Zika virus a couple of years ago. Then we changed locations because of Donald Trump's little escapade when we went to Singapore. And now we've got COVID. And that was why we didn't want to lose any more money from the Montreal Convention Centre. And we have an interesting structure in OHBM, and I'm going to start a chair's blog, which I'm going to try and let people see what's under the hood of that big oil tanker that's OHBM. We have in our bylaws, and we have bylaws that are they're there for a good reason. We have to carry a certain financial reserve, and they're bylaws, and we have to have our books audited. Part of that reason is that we need to be able to have the reserve to be able to mount a future meeting. And so that's why we're always concerned about budgeting. Because when we mount a future meeting, say we think about Korea and we have a face-to-face component as well as an online component, all of those costs that we have for organising the meeting come up front, and they come up sometimes years ahead of time. And people don't realise that, and we don't recoup often a lot of the expenses when we, even when the meeting's over. takes months to sometimes get all of the revenue back. And it's a hard thing economically, but our bylaws limit our financial reserves and what we can do and what we can't. And the books are audited by accountants, and so we have to be very, very careful for what we're doing. And I'll try and I'll write some blogs on this so people can start to understand the infrastructure of it and how it works. But that's part of the reason that we've had financial challenges as well. So that's going to be something we're going to have to discuss. And, obviously I can't provide a solution to that. But that's one of the problems that we grapple with all the time. And this has happened not just for virtual meetings, it's happened for other meetings as well. So that's a challenge. Now, would anyone else on the panel like to, Stephan wanted to say something?
Everyone. I'll try to keep it quick. I think, so I've heard the argument about the reserve a lot, and I get the practical implications of that. But I also feel like this whole experience has shown us what practically is possible, especially in terms of cost savings. And I feel like that should have some momentum to perhaps change the way that OHBM itself looks at that. Why is that reserve necessary? Because it seems like a bit of a status quo bias, because this is the way things are done, and we need to keep the reserve, so that argument kind of flows over to the next year and the next. But should we not interrupt that line of reasoning at some point, given new information? And I feel like this whole experience in the past few months has given us new information, and we should take that into account and try to see if we can change the way that those finances work, or if they're really necessary. I also think in general, conferences are way expensive, and that's another reason why a lot of people cannot join. And I also think in this year the cost for OHBM was way expensive for a software solution that didn't give by far didn't give the level of service that you expect for that price. And we also showed that you can do well with a lot of time from committed members. Sorry, I'm distracted by the awesome cat that's on. That's a good distraction. I think, yes, it takes a lot of time, and we should talk about the costs, like the implicit cost of people generating their or giving their time for this. But the cost you have to spend to pay for license fees for these software solutions compared to what we actually had to pay for the existing or the current OHBM software solution is way less. And we need to also focus, I think, on that argument. So we need to be more inclusive by charging less, and see how we can make that work, and try and re-question ourselves, do we need to keep that reserve? Is that possible? Should we, I have no idea how the bylaws work or the whole system. There's some mechanics in the background, but can we change that? And is it worth changing?
Yeah, let me say, just in response.
You're muted, Aina.
The bylaws in theory can be changed, but it requires a vote for the entire membership. And it's not something we do lightly. I'm not saying that any bylaws changes are out of the question. We changed our bylaws last time in 2016 when we became a society. And part of that change to a society also allowed us to think about other activities that we would support during the year. So the question is, how do you support other activities? Online activities, obviously. We've been talking about that now in conferences, but there are chapters from other areas. Travel awards, other initiatives that go on year round that we try to see, and so that also gets factored into that as well. And that's a huge discussion. but it's a discussion that has to be had. But there are lots of components to that. It's not just the annual meeting now. And that's why we changed our bylaws to become a society. So yeah, that's a big discussion. Lee, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, talking about this, that really this year was kind of an experiment in seeing what the community of OHBM wants, which was unfortunately not the solution that in a very short amount of time OHBM came up with. What people very clearly wanted was the type of solution that the OSR came up with. Couldn't that make us kind of go back and question what are all the other things that we do at OHBM, because that's how we've done it for the last 10 years? And what do actually the members of OHBM, like, can we not, is there some way to democratize that process? I'm just thinking of things like the catering in Rome last year. Why single-use plastic cups? You know, the stupid things that probably cost a lot of money, that maybe people will be happy to do without, to pay a little bit less in their registration fee, or to change some other part of the conference that would make it a better experience for them. So that's just my
well, that's the plastic cups thing was a surprise, I tell you. The problem with that, though, with conference venues, is that you get the staff and the facilities with that, and so that was something that we all kind of took a step back and went, oh my goodness, and that was something that was part of that venue. So, and I'm not saying it was right, but that's what happened, and it was a shock to me too. Daniel, you wanted to say something.
So I want to sort of expand and redirect this slightly. The question on refunds or not is separate from the I think the clear thing that the vendor that was chosen was not providing the things that this community needed, and any of 100 people who sat down and looked at that would have known that in advance. So when we're talking about sort of looking back on what could change, it seems that a lot of these sort of logistical, practical decisions are made sort of either by professional staff with less of the scientific leadership or less of the community leadership until it's too far into the process to change as possible. So if any time between April and May, someone sat down and said, let's go, a few scientists sat down and said, let's look at what they're going to give us on the site in detail, they would have been obvious that there was a problem much earlier. So I think there has to be an expanded discussion on, and this overlaps a lot of these issues, on at what points do we go to the professional staff and say, no, this is actually a discussion that you have to get feedback on. You can't just make a decision here. That we need scientists' input on at a much earlier phase, because they're the ones that are consuming these, that are actually going to have to deal with these decisions.
Okay, that point is well taken. Pierre?
Well, just as reacting to what was just said, I feel like you have two extreme examples of governance structure. The OSR is all volunteers, and people have been complaining it was too much work. The first time we had the Open Science Room and the hackathon, it was organized by me and Clara Moreau. And, we were two. Then we were overwhelmed. We invited other people to help with the Open Science Room. That thing has expanded already as such. And now, it's a sizable team, and they're saying we need to be much more. And I agree. The other end of the spectrum is the HBM committees. There's many people doing a lot of volunteer work. Those people are not paid and are putting lots of hours, but we rely on a company to do all the sort of heavy lifting behind the scenes. And that sometimes leads to the kind of situation here that, we had those emergency meetings one after another, no time to re-expand the discussion. The executive office came with a solution. Everybody was happy to say yes. We were told this was a proven solution that had been used extensively. And, to some degree, it does work. It just doesn't work necessarily for the needs of a part of our community that's overrepresented today on this call, and which is, my part of the community. But I think it's you can't have it all. If you want something that's smooth and requires less input and hours of volunteer work, you have a bit less granular control. Now, moving forward, I also wanted to say that there's a good chance we won't be able to have an in-person large meeting next year either. And even if we could, I think based on what we heard, it would be good to keep the virtual meeting anyway because of the inclusivity and being able to reach not only to other types of folks inside the countries traditionally represented, but also other countries. And maybe one model would be to have a hybrid solution where we have some local hubs that meet physically to maybe watch the global broadcasts and possibly broadcast some content themselves. I don't know. And I feel like the question of the cost is tied to the scale. Like it's very, very hard to organize a meeting with 4,000 people that's cheap. It's relatively easy to do one with 100 or 200 people and almost free. So the costs really don't scale linearly with the size. So this distributed system may help bring everything down a lot. But we obviously need to find a way to integrate the OSR without burning out completely volunteers. So there's a lot of challenges ahead. But
yeah, there's also a lot of challenges. I've started a dialogue already with our friends and colleagues in Seoul, because they're really in the hot seat too. And their health and safety here is also an issue. This is something we've also got to think about. And so they are going to be part of the dialogue with the program committee and council, and also obviously folks in the Open Science Room, to work out how we can pull off a meeting that's going to be, that's going to meet our needs. And we're also, on council, we've talked about multiple models for a meeting, because we don't know what's going to happen. This is like hitting a moving target. This is every month something changes. We don't know what's going to happen. So this time we're going to be ready. We're going to have maybe 3 financial models, potentially 3 models of how to run the meeting. Maybe there's a face-to-face meeting. Maybe there's a hybrid, and maybe there's a virtual meeting. And so we have to be nimble. We have to be ready. We're learning now that, look, the last couple of years, OHBM meetings have had challenges we never had before. And we have to be ready for that. We absolutely have to be ready for that. And we have to be respectful of our colleagues in Seoul, because they are too. They've all have challenges too. They have to feel safe, and they have to feel like they can tell us if they don't want us to be there. So we got a lot of problems. And that's okay, because we've got to talk about it. And that's what we're doing today. And I think this is really, really terrific. Now, Daniel, you wanted to say something, and then Lee's got a comment as well.
So I think when we're talking about expanding roles of the scientific volunteers or paid scientists, part of that discussion is also shrinking roles that scientists are doing that they don't have to do. So as an example, for these OSR sessions, there's an immense number of scientists right now that are coordinating these crowdsourced meetings, who are like saying, okay, here are the emails, let's get these people in, let's monitor chats in 3 different places. It's mentally exhausting. And while it's nice to have people in these roles who know each other as scientists, if we're talking about like reducing volunteer effort, that's a great place where, a few paid staff to sort of say, handle the logistics so I can handle the stuff that isn't logistics, would make a huge difference. So there's definitely ways that we can shrink volunteer load effectively as well.
There's a comment from Lee here.
No, it's fine. I don't need to talk.
Okay.
Yes,
But
you
Katja,
do.
Roberto.
It's a good comment.
I was just going to say, because we're talking about that scientists don't necessarily have an input, or not as much as an input as might be necessary in how the meeting is organized. And I mean, arguably the committees are those representative scientists, which obviously isn't the whole membership, and we don't represent the whole membership. And I don't speak for the committee, but at the same time, we make suggestions, and then that's not a guarantee if we put them to council that will happen. An example is something like, we want gender neutral bathrooms. So, I can go to the bathroom that I want, and that's put to council, and council says, well, I mean, of course we have a venue. It's difficult. We have to see what they say. So, there's this huge barrier that's really difficult to deal with.
Okay, Michele.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to a certain extent, I think we can make the SIGs actually a voice for the larger community. If we can engage our, relative audiences, and then bring that back to council with the proviso that, these things are really taken seriously. And I think it seems that going forward, when we're thinking about different models, whether it's in person, hybrid, all of these things, it seems like we do need some kind of way of engaging the membership, because there's a lot of things that came up in this virtual setting. I mean, I know it was, extremely last minute, but that those solutions people would have known about before, or at least they would have anticipated the problems. But I guess there wasn't really time to engage them, whereas now we can. So maybe we should be finding ways to do that.
Well, I think, one of the things that we've been talking about on council is, we going back to the bylaws. I mean, we're thinking about, changing, having a change to the bylaws about having representation of, Open Science SIG and postdoc and student SIG on the council, but we have to change the bylaws, of course. I'm not saying that that's going to be a problem necessarily, but we got to do it. But these things, when the bylaws were framed by David Van Essen in 1997, these were just a twinkle in, they weren't even a twinkle in anyone's eye. And it's amazing. And for me, having been 25 years at this thing, and I sat on one of the first earliest councils, and I've been reflecting a lot on that now. This is amazing what's happened in 25 years. And now we're grown up and our frontal lobes are fully developed because we're 25. And I think we can move on and we can do something really, really cool. And we can change and we can do this. And so even though, there's a lot of challenges, I don't think this is impossible at all. And just because we've been doing something, look, you know me very well. You know my catch cry is if we've done something for 20, 25 years or 10 years, well, why are we doing it now if it's not working? So I don't have any issues with changing things. We just got to have a good discussion and make sure we change things and we incorporate that. I personally am going to probably, I want to introduce diversity training to all the committees, including council, because we are what we are. I'm white. I have my implicit biases. I try to make myself aware of them, but I am what I am. And so, by having these kinds of training sessions and having material that's available, and this is where the diversity committee and inclusion committee can help us. My goal is obviously my goal when I came onto council, when Joanne Tai, our executive director, who's sitting in the audience, and she was very, very hard, and I love her to death. She asked me, well, what do you want to do as council chair? And when the world was in a different place, and I said, I want to have a significant online component. Well, be careful because you might get what you wish for. That's not exactly what I expected, but that's what I was about. But I also want to deal with the diversity issue. And I think now that we've got a really, really good diversity and inclusion committee, now we can get our tentacles into the other committees. And then I think we'll function a lot better. And then we'll have a better plan for future meetings. So in the short time that we've got left, and we've already drifted nicely into this last question, let's pick up the loose ends on that last question. What might be done to make this happen? And you've already been going to those places. So the floor's open.
I think Katja and Roberto want to say something.
Yep. So the question of the hybrid models has come several times. And for example, when you develop a website, you develop all the time for the small screen, so that even if everything degrades, at least in the small screen, you will have something that's usable. Probably one very concrete thing that we could try to do that could make a difference is to try to engage OHBM into providing something that would be the minimum service, kind of, like a guaranteed on virtual meeting, online presence that would be very, very cheap, accessible to everyone. And so that probably even using only open source tools that we don't have to pay for, like we did with the Jitsi or GitHub or etc. But that one would be available for basically for everyone. And then on top of that, if someone wants to have to travel to Hawaii, whatever, no, and be in the place where the person is talking, then they can go for the higher fee. But at least everyone will be able, if they have everyone will have the alternative to be present and to be part of the community and to share, and not as one model or the other, but this model all the time, and on top of that one something else, and on top of that one eventually something different.
And also, like, maybe one thing I wanted to share, we have been, when COVID started, we said, okay, let's take the opportunity to really do what we wanted to do for a long time, to create this permanent space where we can meet online and collaborate and find collaborators and meet friends and stay in touch and get our projects not only going like a 3-day hackathon, but continue them and be connected once in a while. And so we created this brain map, and we didn't know how to go about it, but we did it in the open. All our planning was all over GitHub on Mattermost. And so when we said how we want to do it, people would chime in from the community and say, no, actually, we bought Crowdcast, and I can give you access to my account so you don't have to pay, but you can use it because you expect more than 100 people to connect. And so it was the community who helped us build it. I don't know if it's possible for OHBM to just plan more openly. If you had said, this is the platform we're going to use, this is going to happen, then we could have tested just like on the capacities we have, but as a community of 4,000 people or even more, we would have been able little by little maybe to contribute to the meeting with our experience. But that's just like one. Thanks.
That's a very good point, and now we've got time, because now we've just gone into July. Now we can start thinking about this, how we do this. We don't have to spin this thing on a dime this time. We can get this right. I see a question from Daniel's got us a question from the balance between professional and volunteer work. Yes, this has fallen to a lot of early career researchers and trainees this last week. But what I'd also like to mention is that how many senior faculty, how many papers I could have written, and how many grants I could have put in that I haven't been able to because of OHBM. And I don't know if people know how much time people on council spend, and that's why we are so grateful that we have our executive office, because we cannot, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. We can't deal with all of the issues and all of the committees, and we're forever spending a lot of time on that. And I do that gladly because, I serve my community, but it's been a big cost for me too. And I just wanted to mention that, because I think a lot of people maybe don't realise how brutal it is to be on council. I just rotated off program committee and then got elected as council chair now. And so now it's another 3 years of hard labour. But I'm willing to do it because of people like you guys that are out there. You guys make it worth it. Okay, so does anyone, we've got 5 minutes. Michele wants to wrap up.
No, sorry, I just wanted to say on that point, I think for ECRs, one of the issues is that our jobs are incredibly insecure. And so any time that we take away from that is quite detrimental to our careers, whereas this senior faculty, a little bit more security there. So I think that's an issue for us.
I want to echo that. So I also don't think people know how much time people on committees also put into this, making this work. So I think one of the important things of open science is that we should talk about that. We should talk about that more and discuss that on all levels. And I think that's also an underlying factor that needs to improve for the next OHBM, in the sense that we have great committees like council, program committee, all the SIGs, all the other committees of OHBM that I don't even know about. Sorry. But we have great people on them, and we have elected great people, and those people are supposed to then be representatives of the people who want them to be on those committees. But I don't feel like in the past we've used that And I think a core component there is communication and inclusion. So this is going to be complicated. It has been complicated, right? So the next one we've learned a bit, but the next one will also be complicated because we're considering hybrid meetings or fully virtual or in person. And I like those complications. I think it's a nice challenge for us, and I think we can rise to that occasion. But that complication brings gets worse if we don't communicate well. And what we've seen from the past few months is the communication has not been what it should be, and that has resulted in things that could have been prevented if we communicated better. And I think a lot of that also rests on people in power. So the council need to reach out more, in my opinion, to these committees individually and ask them and include them in the decisions that are being made earlier. So, for example, in the OSR, we saw this platform that that was selected for the event, because we also needed to build in OSR content into that, and we thought about it a lot, and we discussed it internally, and we decided not to focus all our efforts internally in that, because we knew this is not going to allow us the things that we want to do with the OSR. And then we decided to build all of these extra stuff on the side. And I think, like as most of the people here have said, it's been great. And like I'm personally just overwhelmed with the community and everything, and just it's really joyful to experience this. But I think that's a core point in the sense that communication needs to be top notch, and people in large companies they get this right. It's not new to humans. Like we can do it right if we start communicating our efforts better, if we include more people from different distributed groups, and if we specifically include them in the decision making. Because if we don't do that, then all the effort that people are putting in these committees can be for nothing, and that is something we shouldn't let happen. Because I think the committees are also, or the SIGs are doing great work to improve inclusivity, to lower the barrier to entry, to more access, to lower costs, to lower the impact on the environment. So I think communication is really important here. And I'll stop with that. Thank you.
I want to jump in and reiterate the point about ECRs being vulnerable in their job positions. They're building their careers, and for them to take these leadership roles and take the time out of their career building to work on building these communities, it's not something that they receive sort of career credit for. This is volunteer work that needs to be better rewarded. And I'm looking at Stephan in particular. I've been watching him for 2 weeks now. And he's clearly sick. He's clearly overworked. He's clearly not doing very well. And we as a society are taking advantage of his labor. I'm upset by that. I don't think that's okay. I think there perhaps needs to be more distribution of the labor. There needs to be more support from other types of infrastructure. As someone who is senior, I regret that the ECRs are taking on the burden of building what senior researchers should be building. And so I'm troubled by it. I just wanted to put a label on it and thank Stephan and Cass and everybody on the OSR again for all of your work, all of your time, all of your effort, all of your blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, I echo that too. And
I also just want to quickly say that there are so many people that we have not mentioned here, that volunteers who stood up and said we can help, and they've been putting all of their time into this, and mostly ECRs. So shout out to all of those people as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and you know, it's ironic here because, and this is wrapping, I have to wrap up, but we've got lots of good information here. We've had a really good discussion, and it's ironic because we've spent a lot of time talking about communication, and here we are communicating virtually in an impoverished medium, which I think is kind of ironic at some level. But nevertheless, I think that we've got our points across today, and I think that this is really good. And I think that, you know, what we should maybe think about is doing this from time to time. We know we've got the technology, let's do it from time to time, and let's touch base. And we're going to have to do it because this next meeting is going to be, it's going to be a moving target. And so let's continue this sort of work. I personally am getting used to these Zoom meetings. I think this is the way of life for me now. And I like seeing people's smiling faces. So I think we can do this. So I would like to thank everybody who participated today, who are brave enough to get on screen. I'd also like to thank the people who are online now and who have contributed to chat. We may not have had a chance to get to everyone's questions and comments, but we've got it recorded. We've got a record. We've got a record of this online, of this meeting as well. And we've got Dan Handwerker's Google Doc that's developing. And this is something that I'll be able to take all this stuff back to council, and we'll be able to talk. And hopefully Pierre and Joanne and Daniel Margulies and Randy, if she's floating around here in the ether somewhere, have listened to all of this. And that's it, it's going to be really useful to everybody. So thank you again. And thank you for letting me into the OSR for the first time. I've had actually quite a nice time. Thank you.
And thank you, Aina. I think on behalf of all of us as well, like it's great to have this conversation, and an open one at that. And for you to be willing to share that with us is really great. Thanks.